Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. Today, we're diving into a system you might not even realize is a system, the way we interpret the Constitution. This book argues that the way we argue about our most fundamental laws is what actually determines the rights we have day to day.
So the book is Allow Me to Retort by the legal commentator Elie Mystal. And look, it doesn't just critique the U.S. Constitution, it goes a step further and argues that the whole way it's interpreted today is fundamentally broken.
It really kicks off with this powerful question. What if interpreting the law isn't some neutral, objective process? What if, and this is the key idea, it's actually a system that's often used to protect the powerful and just keep things the way they are?
Okay, so to really get how this works, we have to look closer at what the author calls the central problem. The problem of interpretation itself. This quote from the book, man, it gets right to the heart of it. The Constitution has the water we need, right? Our rights and freedoms. But Mystal argues it's often interpreted in a way that deliberately pours that water right into the sand in front of us. So the problem isn't just the words written back in the 18th century. It's about how those words are actively being used or, misused right now. And right at the center of this whole thing is a legal theory called originalism. Now, the book argues this isn't just some dusty, neutral way to read the law. It's actually more like a cover story, a way to make politically driven court decisions seem like they were the only possible outcome, like they were dictated by history itself. So how does this so-called logic of neutrality actually play out? Well, the book points to this huge gap between what the law says and what it actually does. This is a perfect example of that gap. On one side, you have this really important principle, equal protection of the laws. Sounds great, right? But on the other side, you have the Supreme Court in Plessy v. Ferguson using that exact principle to legally justify racial segregation. It's a classic case of how a neutral-sounding rule can be twisted to produce a deeply, deeply discriminatory result. But the book also talks about a powerful counter-system. The author argues that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments weren't just simple edits. No way. They were a second founding, a fundamental system patch, like a software update, designed to fix what he sees as the original document's deepest flaws, especially its foundation in white male supremacy. All right, so if interpretation is a system, what keeps it going? The book argues it's all about these reinforcing feedback loops. Just look at this cycle. It starts with political power, which influences who gets appointed as a judge. Then, those judges apply a specific way of thinking, like originalism. Their rulings then shape our political reality and create legal precedent. And here's the kicker, those outcomes tend to reinforce the very political power that put them there in the first place. It creates this self-perpetuating root for one particular worldview. So keeping that feedback loop in mind, how can we start to reframe the rules of this whole system? To make this all a bit less abstract, the book offers a really helpful way to picture it. Okay, think of it like this. The Constitution isn't some self-enforcing computer code. It's more like a rulebook for a very exclusive club. And the meaning of those rules? Well, that's controlled by a small, pretty insulated committee, the judiciary, that gets to decide how they apply to everyone else. It makes you realize this is a very human process, and it really matters who gets to be on that committee. So really, what a book like this helps us see is that legal rulings aren't these inevitable truths handed down from the heavens. They're the product of choices, of arguments, of power dynamics, all happening inside this human-designed system of interpretation. And why does that matter? Well, this whole framework reframes what our rights even are. They aren't these static things locked away in a vault. Instead, they're the constantly negotiated outcomes of this powerful and frankly deeply consequential system. It totally shifts the focus from what the rules are to who gets to decide what they mean. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoyed this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.